Bam.
This is Joe Orrico, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Thanks for coming on the show, man. There's people I get to talk to on my show. And you don't know me at all. We were just now meeting, but I've got over 2,000 of these episodes. So I've done this for a long time. And I meet people all the time that have dream jobs. I've met a butcher in San Francisco who is living his dream. And it sounds like butching, but is just magical dude. You have a dream job. You get to think and talk and write about sports all the time. You give advice all the time. If you could tell your 10-year-old self this was the path, would that kid, the 15-year-old you, the 20-year-old you, would he believe that?
I think generally what I do, my 10-year-old, 15-year-old self wouldn't be too surprised that it's sports related.
Mm-hmm.
My role in the space in the 5 or so years I've been in it has changed drastically several times. I used to do a daily podcast and I used to write a lot more than I do now. What I do mostly is I'm a producer for Fantasy Pros. If you're watching live, you can see
Right.
the background and the hat. That's mostly what my day job is. I also do some work at Fangraphs, at FTN Fantasy. I have my own site, my own Patreon. So there's a few different things, but the thing that pays the bills is producing podcasts at Fantasy Pros. And if you told me that 10, 15 years ago, I probably would not have believed I'd be a producer. I would have thought I would have
Yeah.
been more on the writing side. And I still do write, but a lot of what I do is behind the scenes now when I used to be more in front of the camera a lot. So it's an ever changing role, but at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it is still a dream job. Working in sports is something that makes me happy every single day. Even on the days where the job can be a pain in the ass, like every job, I'm still very
Sure.
grateful for it.
Yeah, yeah. I often say I get to do this thing, especially on the production side. When you're, the other day I was trying to do a show and it was sunspots or something, and the Wi-Fi was just kicking me off, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Like this is my job. I can't just say, well, there's, sunstorms outside. I've got to produce, right? And so, yeah, I get to do it. Is kind of how I approach it. Even then, there's things that I would love to do that I just don't have time for because a lot of my business is business and not fun.
Yeah, I mean, I wish there were 30 hours in the day. If it was only even 28, 30 hours, I'd get so much
Yeah,
more done. But the working in sports aspect, there is the wanting to watch sports aspect. Because when I'm done work, I want to go and turn on the football game, turn on the baseball game, turn on the hockey game, whatever it
wow,
happens to be. I'm Canadian, so there's hockey in my blood, obviously. But then you get to, well, I want to watch a movie tonight, or I want to, watch a TV series. It's hard to find time to have a bit of a social life when you're working in sports, especially because a lot
yeah,
of the stuff is off hours. I work for a West Coast based company, but I'm on the East Coast. So a lot of the
yep,
time I don't start work until a little bit later on. And then I end, 7, 8, 9 p.m. Some nights it's after midnight, depending on what time of year it is. And you just got to work in those times to, still do things for yourself, I think.
yeah. When you go to a party, what is it that you say you do?
I usually, just to keep it simple, I say I'm a sports writer, because when I get into the whole fantasy baseball analyst thing, people start to look at you a little bit funny. I remember it was one time I
Yeah,
was going over the border a couple years ago for a fantasy baseball conference, and I told the border guy, like, "Hey, it's a fantasy baseball conference," and the guy looked at me like, let me take another look at your passport here. Like, it's a little bit of an odd thing. It's a little bit niche when you say you work in fantasy sports. So I try and keep it simple. I try and just say I'm a sports writer to get the
yeah,
umbrella covered.
yeah. I think being a podcaster, the last couple times I got pulled over like twice in a week about a month ago, maybe three times all of a sudden. Like in California, they started upping the enforcement, and so I'm like, oh shit, these places where I used to drive too fast, I have to slow down. And I've got a couple of cool jobs, and I was off to a conference because I used to be a spy, and I was off to a conference. He's like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm off to this conference. It's a spy conference, and I'm gonna be talking at it." And he's like, "A spy conference," and that was it. I wasn't gonna get a ticket. He loved me. And then another time, I'm like, "Oh, I'm a podcast producer," because that's all true too. And for whatever reason, that guy loved that, and he's like, "What do you talk about?" And then the world's my oyster because it's all interesting stuff. But it is funny how we get these little benefits from our job. What is, I mean, look, obviously you're going to get access in sports and that kind of thing, but what has popped up for you that you're like, because of my show I get to do this? All right.
Well, like I alluded to, the trip to the states that I make every year in November, it's for a
Yeah,
fantasy baseball conference, which has been really cool.
yeah,
It's put on by Baseball HQ, who are a leader in the fantasy baseball space. Really a great site and great company that puts on a lot of events. But that's the main one in Arizona. They call it First Pitch Arizona. And going
hmm
down there, the first time I went, I was 21 or 22 years old, and I didn't know anybody. And I'd been doing my own thing, writing articles and doing my own solo podcast to an audience of 6 or 7 people at the time, and I didn't know anybody. I was the new guy, and just getting to become friends with people who are really well known in the space, who
yeah,
really know what they're talking about, has been really cool. Eno Saris, Paul Spohr, people like that who are just fountains of knowledge. Getting to talk with them, getting to go to baseball games with them, have a meal, have a beer, shoot the breeze, and become friends with people who I looked up to, reading their articles in my teen years, and now they're
wow.
they're friends and colleagues. So that's been a kind of a surreal perk for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, though my show is not a sports show, I talk to a lot of sports people, and Rob Nyer is that person for me. I used to read Rob all the time back in the olden times, and now I can safely say, like, we're friends. Like, we don't hang out friends, but, if I wanna have him on the show to talk about something, he's tickled to do it, and we have the best time, and we always wanna do more. Met him face to face. All these things go into that friend category. It is absolutely a delight to do that. I get to interview a lot of sports people. I had Tim Neverett from the Dodgers on the show. What a great guy. I got to meet Ned Coletti, who used to run the Dodgers. All these people, it just come into your life. And I am just
Yeah.
thrilled to meet all of them. And they're like, I've had breakfast with Boog Sciambi a couple of times, and just you couldn't meet a nicer guy to talk to.
Yeah, this space is very cool, and also becoming friends with a couple of players in the league and getting to
Mhm.
meet a lot. I haven't actually met them personally, but through producing shows that they've been on or going back and forth in the DMs about things, it is kind of surreal. It really is. If you told me that, 5, 10 years ago, you'd be talking to major league players, I would
Yeah.
definitely not have believed that aspect.
You know, what we both do, because again, I cover sports just a little bit. I wouldn't even say I cover sports. I talk about sports a little bit, but what I say matters and people hear it. And so I wouldn't normally be inclined to bash players anyhow. I might critique a player, but I'm never going to say that person is a bad person or whatever. I don't meter what I'm honest about what I'm saying, but I'm also realizing, man, these guys might see this, and I got to make sure I say what I need to say without just saying some stupid stuff. You hear a lot of dumb things out there, especially on X. Oh my gosh, what a garbage pile that's that place is sometimes. But how do you handle that? How do you maintain your integrity while still providing the analysis when you're on the analysis side? Or look, you're producing. If you've got a host that's talking, you may be guiding them like, hey, a little less of that is going to be good, and a little more of this.
Yeah, I don't try and go at players for things that aren't statistical, factual, that you can, if it can't be proven by the
Mhm.
data, then you shouldn't be talking about it. If you just have a
Yeah,
feeling, oh, I don't like this guy, I think he's going to, people will kind of tune you out if you don't have the numbers behind it. Now, there's the other side of that coin where if you put too much data behind a take, there are a lot of newer school fans who couldn't care less about any of the new stats. It's all made up BS and they don't want to hear it. So it's kind of towing that line in the middle to appeal to as many people as possible, but also to just give as fair of a take as possible. And when you have access to so much data, I feel very confident when I'm putting out a take, whether it's positive or negative, that it is backed up by what the player has done and what we can project them to do. So it's never a situation where I don't like this guy personally, so therefore I'm going to bash him, even though he's a good player. Like that,
yeah.
that just isn't something I could do. Like I'm a Blue Jay fan, so it's a little bit harder for me to find love in my heart for Yankees and Red Sox players. But at the end of the day, if they're a good draft pick, giving fantasy advice, if there's a Yankee player who's a really good bargain, I'm going to target them, and I'll tell people to target them as much as it'll hurt me in my heart a little bit as a Blue Jay fan. Objectivity is the most important thing, I think, in this space.
Yeah, that's cool. One thing I'm realizing, I got into Bill James back in the 1980s. Okay, so I've been into Bill James for a long
Yeah.
time, and I've grown substantially from where he started and how what he taught me, what Rob taught me, and all my own. I feel pretty confident. Look, I'm not a statistician, but I know how to work stats because I've learned about baseball, and it's amazing how much dissent there can be on a thing that you're like, but look at the number right there, right there it is. Look, I get that rate stats and counting stats that there's some disagreement there, but a pile of 3,000 hits is a pile of 3,000 hits. Those things happened on the field, and that shit's rare, right? So why do we struggle so much with the nuance that's often in these conversations?
I think a lot of it is that people have been watching baseball a certain way and understanding it for their whole lives.
Okay.
Home runs, RBIs, runs, ERA, strikeouts. There's a lot of stats that have been drilled into them as these are the important stats we look at. This is what the awards are given out based on. But a lot of the time, especially with ERA and with batting average, they don't tell the entire story. I see ERA in particular as more of a team-based stat. There could be a pitcher who has a 2.5 ERA in a given year, and you'd easily project him above 4 the following season based on a number of factors. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. The guy had a sub-3 ERA this year. He can do it again next year. And it's possible. It's always possible. But what we try to do, you look at the numbers below the surface. How hard on average is the guy getting hit? If they're hitting him hard 50+% of the time and he's somehow skating by because those balls are getting hit directly at people, that's something that will probably correct over the course of a season, over the course of 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Players can very rarely skate by forever without having a lot of good underlying data. There are cases where sometimes something isn't captured, whether it's in WRC plus or WAR or something where a player does become undervalued. They're not perfect formulas, but a lot of the time, leaning into those advanced numbers, as much as it goes against the grain of people who've been watching baseball their whole lives, it will give you an edge, especially if you're talking about projecting for next year. And if you're playing fantasy sports, if you're playing fantasy baseball, there's a lot of guys who maybe didn't have the greatest season in 2025, but you can look under the hood and say, no, they were a little bit unlucky. 2026 should be a lot better for them. But if you just looked at the surface stats, you might say, like Dylan Cease is a great example. He had a 4.5 ERA last year, and he's inconsistent, so therefore he's a bad pitcher. I think Dylan Cease is a great pitcher. He just struggles with inconsistencies. But there are so many nuances when it comes to evaluating players, and I think over time people will catch up to it. But right now, a lot of those stats are still in their infancy, and people are usually averse to change when it happens. They don't want to look at baseball differently than they have been for 30, 40 years. So they don't look at the numbers that they should be looking at. And hopefully over time, more conversations and podcasts like this will help people look more below the surface as opposed to just looking at ERA and drawing a conclusion on that.
It's funny. When I was talking about this, we went down the road of like guys who are older like me who think about RBI. But I would say the same thing exists for folks who lean too heavily on WAR, and I'm using WAR as an example. WAR's fine, right? But you and I both know, like, it's a portal to maybe like, wait, that person's got 65 WAR. What am I missing here? Or wait, why does this person only have 35 WAR but has all these home runs? What is going on? So that's sort of like where the questions for me start, right? So what do we do about the people that are like, this person's got this thing and they are unable to see any other evidence? Because a lot of times one number will like a guy, one number won't.
It's really just, you have to look at so many different things in order to evaluate a player. I think there are probably 60 or 70 things that I look at before putting out a tweet about a player or before drafting a player onto one of my teams. The thing about fantasy baseball is that the game is still played with average home runs, RBIs, strikeouts, ERA, WHIP. As much as we're evaluating on the deeper level, the game does come back to the base level stats still. And while they are important, I want to look at a lot of different factors, whether, RBI, we'll just look at RBI, for example. Is a guy in a good lineup spot? Because the guy could be a great hitter, but if he's hitting 6th or 7th, it will potentially hurt his RBI opportunities. Did he get lucky in terms of how many home runs he hit in a given season? Like, let's look at Eugenio Suarez, for example. He had 49 home runs last year, tailed off a little bit going to Seattle, but he drove in 118 runs.
Yes.
I don't know that wherever he goes next year, I would expect 118 again. That for me looks like a bit of an outlier. He's never had that number in his career before. Even when he had a previous 49 home run season, he drove in 103. It really depends on where he ends up, what the ballpark looks like, because if he goes to Pittsburgh or back to Seattle, it would really hurt the right-handed pop. And those lineups are good, but not great, especially Pittsburgh. So RBI is something that I think is very volatile. It's hard to predict in a given year.
Yeah.
Suarez has had seasons of 70 RBI, and he's had 118. He's had 96. He's had 79. It's very hard to predict the runs and RBIs down to even within a range of 5 or 10. But I think you can kind of give a general, or you can have a general idea just based on track record, where they're going to be in a lineup, how hard they hit the ball. Those things all matter when it comes to potential for driving in runs. It's just such a volatile stat year to year. And I think people might look at that, especially somebody who's very casual, not anybody who is reading a lot of articles. They might just be a guy who's in one fantasy league with their buddies, and they'd say Suarez went for 49 and 118 last year. I think he's doing that again. I'm drafting him to my team. And that would be the most base level analysis. But there are a lot of people who are still doing it like that. And I think that's where there is a little bit of an edge if you're willing to take the time and dig a little deeper on the stats.
Yeah. You don't just work in baseball, football, and everything else. So when you look at the sports that use a lot of these sabermetric based stats, which one's doing the best job of predicting the future and seeing what actually happened?
For
which sport? I'm saying which sport, not which number.
Which sport? Okay, you cut out there for a second. My AirPods went.
Sorry.
No, it's all
good.
Which
sport is doing the best job of seeing talent either in the future or what has happened?
I think it's baseball, and I'll admit some bias there, as baseball is my favorite sport and the one I cover the most. But I do think that there are more stats available. There's more data available for the average baseball fan than if you are, say, a hockey fan and you're trying to find advanced statistics about your favorite hockey players or team.
Yeah.
It's not as easy when you have sites like Fangraphs, like StatCast, Baseball Reference. There are so many sites that have so many different numbers. And if you go through a particular player page on all of those sites and they're all telling you this guy is a really good ball player, you can be pretty damn sure that they are going to be correct. There's not a 100% hit rate. There isn't in any sport. But I think baseball does a better job of most than getting it right. Football has come a long way in terms of the analytics, with the Pro Football Focus and all the different sites that try and give you all the different rates. And I'm not nearly as versed with football, but like the yards per route run and all the different acronyms, they're getting better with it. I think hockey and basketball have fallen behind a little bit, specifically hockey, but baseball, in my mind, again, with the bias, admitted bias, I think it does the best job.
Well, I mean, they're looking at the rotation of the ball, and just these details that we're still learning how to do it, and the numbers tend to get better. We tend to ameliorate the noise, so here's the thing that I believe I've discovered is right field. I used to live across the street from Wrigley Field. Right field in Wrigley is enormous most of the days of the year. It doesn't look all that big, but you don't see the shots to Waveland over onto Sheffield like you do in Waveland. The ball doesn't go that way. I lived on the right field side. You'd see a ball. I could see from my house, the upper levels of my house, because I lived in a rooftop house. You can see the ball lift, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's going to," and I'm pretty good judge of that. And then it would fall into the stands, and I'm like, "Oh, that didn't even come close to making the street." And so there's these weird anomalies that, unless you think about like the logic problem, why have there not been really very many successful left-handed pitchers at Wrigley? They just don't have a long list of those. Is it the park? Is it the weather? Is it the arms? Is it the GM talent? And then you start exploring, and all of a sudden you realize, right field's the place you want people to hit the ball. So you want to have, you want to focus on that part of the approach. Maybe the Cubs never figured that out. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least you look at the data and you can start to think, oh, there's more here than I realized.
Yeah, I think that comes for pretty much every ballpark. If I go to StatCast and they have a specific page that looks at park factors, there is so much more nuance to it than I ever would have thought. There are certain parks that are terrible for most aspects of the game. They're really bad for singles and doubles and triples, and then they're really good home run parks for one reason or another. Dodger Stadium is a good example of that.
Yeah.
The park factors are all on a scale of 100, with 100 being average, anything above average, below average, obviously. So on base percentage, hits, singles, doubles, triples, Dodger Stadium is below average in all of those aspects, and then 27% better than average for home run factor. So I think Dodger Stadium is always viewed as a hitter-friendly park, but if you're not a big power hitter, maybe it's not. It's a rarely friendly park if you are able to get the ball out of there. If you're a slap hitter, then you're going to lose a lot of base hits, doubles, extra base hits at Dodger Stadium where you wouldn't if you are a power hitter. So there's those little nuances. You can go through every park and you could find little inconsistencies. But that's part of what makes it so much fun. It's like putting a puzzle together, trying to figure out which players are going to succeed in which parks, who's going to get how many starts in this. It really is like a puzzle.
Yeah. Dodger Stadium used to be a fantastic pitcher's park, but it's slowly whittled away from the foul ground has gone away, and it is interesting when you think about the evolution of a ballpark, and you don't make that's not an accident that they sell more. Obviously, they make more money with seats being closer to the field, but also, they've built a slightly different way of approaching the game, especially now. Gosh, they do so many things at the league leading level. And I'm talking the front office, somebody talking on the field. Yeah. So it is interesting to think about how you approach the craft of a stadium. I don't think there's a ballpark more impacted by weather than Wrigley too, because that wind is so, it is always going in a different direction. And most of the directions don't favor hitters. The other thing about, again, because weather matters, Dodger Stadium, if it's a heavy marine layer day, it'll hold on to balls that should have been home runs. And you can see the guy hit it, drop the bat like, oh yeah, and then it easy out, right? So these things, it is really hard to see that in the numbers unless you know what to look for. And a lot of times I'll go look at the weather if I'm looking at a Dodger game. What was the weather that night? Because that really will tell me something about that no-hitter that happened or whatever.
Another thing that can really mess with how we analyze the game is the fact that the ball has changed so much in recent years.
Yeah.
And the league is never transparent about it. They'll never go out and say, we changed this, that, and the other. You have no idea going into a given season, into a given month, what the balls are going to look like. And I think it actually, speaking of the Dodgers, I think it was Teoscar Hernandez this past season, hit a ball to the warning track. And if you looked at the launch angle and the exit velocity, every other ball that had been hit with those metrics had been hit for a home run, and his died at the warning track. And when things like that happen, maybe he just hit a certain part of the ball and it died, things happen. But maybe it's just that the league has messed with the ball so many times that who knows what's out there in a given game. Is it going to be a bouncy ball? Is it the dead ball? Is it the Goldilocks ball, which they somewhat not too cold, not too hot, just right? You never really know. So that's a whole other aspect of the evaluation process where we're kind of blind.
Yeah. We are better able to reverse it now, though, but even like, what does it do to a ball that sits on a shelf for 40 years? Is it the same condition it was in 40 years? So when you do the bounce, even then, you don't know. When I've got a bit of a soapbox that I stand on when people say it's the steroid era, I'm like, not really. I mean, we don't know what the impact of steroids was. I mean, we can kind of see it, but we added, so just hang with me here, we added 5 new teams worth of players in the 90s. So 4 new expansion teams, and the rosters went from 24 to 25 players, right? So that's a lot of new players, and so that made a big difference. Working out, eating healthy, forget the steroids thing, just all of the health stuff that advanced, the advancement of video, all these things came, ballparks, new ballparks with smaller foul ground, all this stuff came that excited offense in a way that, if you account for that, and then you try to bake in steroids, it's really tough to sort out. And then you add in, we don't know the nature of the ball, the strike zone changed, bigger or smaller, right? All these things, I don't know that you can call it the steroid era. Now, maybe you disagree with me on this, but and that's fine. But I call it now just the age of integration of things, right? Because there are so many things that improved the overall quality of play. I mean, LASIK surgery started coming about in the 90s. Oh my God, like what a game changer, No one's wearing glasses on the field anymore. Like that all changed in that decade. And so it's just hard to sort out what that prime thing was to name that era.
Yeah, I have a different view a little bit, but I also have to preface it by saying I was born in 1999. I'm 27, so I didn't get to watch the steroid era as it happened. I've read a lot about it. I know all about Bonds, McGuire, Sosa, etc.
Sure.
It's hard for me to look at their stats, specifically those 3 I mentioned, and not think that they got a boost of some kind, which rubs me the wrong way. I know it wasn't technically against the rules at the time.
Sure.
And the expansion point is a great point, because when you're adding in 4 or 5 teams, you're adding in 100+ players that had not been playing Major League Baseball before that, and you're diluting the talent pool a little bit.
Yeah.
my biggest problem with the steroid era was probably Bonds in retrospect, because he didn't need to do anything. Bonds was a Hall of Famer from the second he stepped on the baseball field in Pittsburgh. His numbers are ridiculous. What
So
kills
good.
me is that he didn't need to do any of that, and his reputation could have been fully intact if he never did anything, and he would be rightfully considered the greatest hitter who's ever played. Because of what happened, and I think with Bonds, we kind of know that he did something. I think there was an impact there, and that's what I hate. I hate changing the playing field, whether or not it was illegal or not at the time. I feel like they did go out of their way to try and gain an advantage on the majority of the rest of the players in the league. Obviously, there was a lot of players doing it, but there were a lot of players who weren't doing it, who are put in an unfair advantage when they're facing somebody who is using human growth hormones. So that's kind of where I'm at on it. I don't really mind if they go to the Hall of Fame, specifically guys like Bonds. A-Rod was another one who was already a clear-cut Hall of Famer, I think, and was always going to be. I have more problems with the guys who like repetitive failed tests. Manny Ramirez, Robinson Cano, these guys who continued to do it well after we knew the rules were in place, and they kept doing it and they kept getting popped. Those are the guys I have much more of a problem with personally.
Yeah. I mean, and I think all of these things are fair, and I think we've seen that that's basically the, it was Jeff Kent that got in, not Barry Bonds, from the Veterans Committee, and look, I struggle with Jeff Kent's in, so he's a Hall of Famer now. You're not going to get an argument from me on that, but I get why it was hard to put him in. I'll say this about the steroid era as well. The narratives got out in front of these guys, and they didn't do a good job of reeling it back in. Mark McGwire's largely disappeared from the game, and that's unfortunate because he was a really wonderful person in the game. But the other thing is like the perception that Sammy Sosa, look, did he do steroids? Well, let's assume that he did, but he was a great player also before that happened. Gary Sheffield was an incredibly talented player, and I think they've paid too much of a cost given the time that they played in, what was normal. And look, we get mad at those guys because they got big. The guys who took them and didn't get big, because there's plenty of guys we can point to like that guy took steroids. Where was so I don't know. Because we can't know, and because there were so many factors that impacted the game, I'm with you. I'm like, let's just let these guys get in there and get on with it, and just say that was an era of many things, and that steroids is part of it. But no one ever gets mad at Todd Stottlemyre Jr., who came back from, I think, a torn rotator cuff, and he was jacked. And he's like, I worked out. I didn't get surgery. I just worked out. And it's like, all right, man. Look, and I'm not mad at Todd for doing whatever Todd needs to do. I can't say that I wouldn't take whatever a steroid would be. Like, if I could take a steroid to be a 100% better podcaster, would I do it? Gosh, I'd certainly think about it. I'm not above that, right? And who wouldn't take a 10% raise at work if they had to get a shot in the butt every couple of weeks for a couple of weeks?
And what we do, I would take it, no problem, no question. I would be a lot more productive, probably, for sure.
Yeah.
It's just I just feel bad for the guys that didn't do it. And I think about my guy in particular in Toronto. Carlos Delgado was one of the first baseball players that I fell in love watching as a kid.
Yeah.
And Delgado probably should be in 480 homers. He was a 280 hitter. He didn't win the MVPs in that era because it was a stacked era for talent. Steroids or not, there was so much talent in that era.
Yeah.
And if Carlos Delgado had taken a little bit of juice, maybe he gets over 500. Maybe he gets into the Hall of Fame, and maybe it wouldn't matter. So I feel bad for the guys who didn't take it, who are also still not in. And I think that goes to the greater point of mine, where the Hall of Fame at this point has become a bit of a joke. And I don't know how much it really matters. When you look at that whole ballot and you see only Jeff Kent got in, I think a lot of people had a laugh. Not to disrespect Jeff Kent necessarily, but when you look at the other guys who were clearly superior players, who there is some more ambiguity about their character or whatever, who are not getting in, that's where I get to the point where I don't know what we're doing here anymore. I'm a huge Bobby Abreu fan. He's not going to get in. Guys who maybe shouldn't get in will get in. I just don't know how much it matters, especially with guys like Bonds and A-Rod and those guys not in.
There's a thing that happens with certain kinds of players, and I don't mean like the style of player, but I mean the way their career evolves. Adrian Beltre is a good example. He reverse splits his career. The back half is better than the front half. But here's the thing about the front half. If you put age timelines together for all the third basemen, and this is no knock on any player. Beltre is starting at third base for the Dodgers when Mike Schmidt is preparing to take finals for his freshman year in college. Holy shit, what? Like he's winning the MVP of Double A as an 18-year-old. And all his buddies are like, this kid's so young. And he was younger than like they thought he was 19. And so when you see that, and then all of a sudden he just goes and goes and goes. So he showed up at age 32. No one thought he was, for the most part, thought he was going to be a Hall of Famer. And then all of a sudden at 35, it's like, this guy's going to have 3,000 hits.
Yeah.
And so it shocks people. Sammy Sosa, very similar, huge start on the front end of his career. And so we miss it. And then the steroid thing happens. And it's like, well, that's why he was good. No, he was good. He was great. He was Hall of Fame trajectory great up until that point where everything changed. And then he really got crazy and whatever. We've talked about that. But that reverse splitting, and then also the slow burn, like an Abreu, who doesn't really have a significant decline. He kind of just plays at that same level for a long time. We struggle to reward that, and we struggle to reward a guy like Mattingly or Murphy who get hurt. Other guys get hurt. The last time we saw last time we saw Kirby Puckett on the baseball field, he was getting hit in the face by a fastball from Dennis Martinez. That for sure, that wasn't the reason why he ultimately had to stop playing baseball, got glaucoma, not associated with that. But that was the last time we saw him, and that shock resonated for 5 years until it's like he would have made it easily. And so he got into the Hall despite a very similar career to Mattingly. But Mattingly's way of winding down and hurting his back, we penalize him for that. And I don't know what we do about that.
Mattingly, I really grew to like him. Just seeing him as a coach in Toronto, he was not a great hitting coach, albeit, but he was a really good bench coach, a good mind for the game. And I was sad to see him go. Actually, today he announced the Phillies announced that he's going to be a bench coach over there. But he should be in the Hall of Fame when you're looking at what he did as in their peak. And peak is very important to me when you're looking at a player over their best 7 or 8 years. There's a metric on Baseball Reference, I think it's Jaws, which looks at the 7, or I think it's your peak 7 years. Yeah, and when you look at what Bobby Abreu did from, I think it was 98 to 2004, he was a top 5 or 6 player in the game based on how we view the game now. When you're looking at the WAR output, which is not perfect, but I think WAR does a pretty good job as an all-encompassing number. If you look back at historical WAR leaderboards, I think most people would look at him and say, yeah, that looks right. That looks right. You get the Bonds, the Babe Ruths, and the Hank Aaron's and everybody. I think they generally do a good job, even if it's not a perfect metric. It's really not, especially for certain positions. First base WAR, you can ignore it pretty much. It really overly penalizes first baseman. But to get back to Beltre for a second, and it kind of ties into the park factor thing we mentioned earlier, going and spending his age 26 through 30 seasons in Seattle almost killed him. That almost killed him right there. He was a 101 OPS plus in his time in Seattle for 5 years. He was an average player pretty much. In Texas, he was 128. In Los Angeles, he was 108. In his 1 year in Boston, he was 141. But those 5 years in Seattle in the middle kind of made people forget about him. He was a 25 home run guy who would hit 260. He was a solid player. But what he became in Texas really solidified him as one of the best third basemen of all time. And it's crazy to think about almost, because Adrian Beltre is somebody I grew up watching, and I thought he was a pretty good player in his 20s. That season for the Dodgers at age 25 is ridiculous. He probably should have been the National League MVP that year. He came second in voting. Actually, he came second to Bonds, and Bonds had a ridiculous year. So maybe not.
Yeah. But, actually, I have him as the GOAT at third base. And look, some people are going to disagree with me, but I'm big on games played at the position. Yeah. So for someone like Pujols, who's got 10% of his career in the outfield, and then the games at third base, that makes it hard for him to rate against first baseman just straight up. As a baseball player, okay, that's different. But when we talk about games at third base, Beltre is second most all time. Huge glove advantage. But again, I'm not huge. I consider the peak, but I'm not huge on it. I do consider, like, when you get out to the edges of a career, if you start at age 19, he was barely 19 when he started. Alex Rodriguez is barely, to even exist in the game, you're 8 years, 9 years, 10 years younger than your average age player. That's remarkable to even exist in that environment. So it's interesting when you think about all the ways to evaluate a career. And so if I was to look at Mike Schmidt, his mountain is higher, but Beltre's got a bigger mountain range. And so I don't know how to work that out. I think they're 1 and 2, but I changed my mind on, and ultimately, who cares who the number 1 or number 2 is? How about the number 17 or 18? Where do you put David Wright compared to Longo compared to, and so it's a great conversation. We are not putting enough players in the Hall of Fame, though, for sure.
Absolutely, 100,000,000% agreed. When I see a writer on their ballot will only check 1 name or 2 names, I go crazy, especially when there are many deserving players that are still up and down the ballot that didn't get in. The third base conversation, would you put A-Rod as more of a third baseman or more as a shortstop in that group?
No, he wouldn't qualify. He would have to be a multi-position player.
Okay.
I'm not sure how to qualify him exactly, but no, because I'm firm. So I don't even put Brett in the top 10. I'm not saying Brett's not great. Brett is a great hitter, but he couldn't hold the position. It's harder to hold the position than it is to get slid over to DH first base.
Right.
So I would say that the gap from him, he's got about 1,700-ish games. I'm off of memory here, but it's 1,700 to 1,800 in that little wedge. And then you go against a guy that's like Beltre, it's got 2,700 games at third. Well, there's just no way. And yeah, I get the quality of per game, but you are not better than a person if you're not at the position. So if Brett was done playing third base at 32 or so, well, he's not better than what Beltre did when he was 35, and Beltre was great at 35. So there, the gap just gets too big. Mickey Mantle can be one of the very best outfielders ever, even though he didn't have as many games played as another guy who was pretty good for a long time. I'm not saying to promote sucky players. Like I struggle with Steve Finley and Luis Gonzalez because they played a load of games and they were excellent, but are they Hall of Fame caliber? Gosh, I don't know. Kind of, yeah, but kind of not. And I don't know what to do with those guys.
There's a lot of players that I think are very close, and there are even more players that I think, why were they so quickly discarded off the ballot?
Right.
The first name that comes to mind would be Johan Santana.
Oh, sure.
Somebody that was probably should have won 3 consecutive Cy Youngs. One of them went to Bartolo Colon, but a guy who was the best pitcher of his era, for sure the best left-handed pitcher of his era. I might go with Roy Halladay as a whole in the 2000s over him, but again, I'm a Blue Jays biased Blue Jay fan. But
and you're talking 2 dudes, so it's fine.
Yeah, but Johan being a one and done was crazy to me. He's a guy who every year he had the traditional stats. He had the wins every year, 19, 20, 16, 15, 19 wins every year. And he was the best pitcher of his era, arguably, with volume, 228 innings, 231, 233, 234. His body gave out on him, but his peak, going back to what I said earlier, the peak years should be rewarded. And Johan is always one that really stands out. I really agree with you on the bigger haul. And he would be, I'd probably put Delgado in first, just being a Blue Jay guy. But Johan Santana, what are we doing with him not being a Hall of Famer?
I'm interested. This is a question I've been asking baseball people, and I don't think you're going to struggle with it, but what is Delgado missing? What did he need? Is it 30 home runs? What would have done it so it would have been like, of course.
I mean, he was 27 home runs shy of 500. I think if he does have that round number, he probably gets in.
Yeah.
I think there was some talk at the time, and I was too young to really pay too much attention to it. But I think he was critical of the Iraq War or something, and the way he went about it, people weren't happy.
It can be something as similar as that. Yeah.
If you piss off the writers, that's part of the reason why Bonds didn't get in, because Bonds was a dick to the writers whenever he would talk to them, and he was mean to the media a lot of the time. And those are the people who put you in. So I think with Delgado, it was something really stupid like that. Like he said something that kind of pissed off members of the media. And I don't know if that's all of it, but when you look at the numbers, the guy had a 929 OPS.
The perception thing is big. It's big with the big awards too. So like Santana at the time, the thing with him was we had Pedro. And so he was sort of like, he's a lot like Pedro because he's got this incredible changeup. But he's even more brittle than Pedro. We know he's not going to last long. And so it almost took away from the incredible things that he did. It was always like, yeah, he's great, but right, even during his prime, right? And so that was sort of the attitude about him. And that's not as fun. And then Bonds is raised by a baseball dad in baseball in a time when baseball was being shitty to black dudes. And so they had a lot of chips on their shoulders, and for whatever reason, that norm hadn't established itself. Yes, racism, but not just racism. There was a turbulent time of integration, and that reflected partly in how Barry approached these things. I'm not putting this on Barry. I'm just saying there is some kind of social reason that has nothing to do with this play on the field, and the riders, those guys, they make money by being. A lot of them make money by being shitty to people.
Yeah, I think that kind of go both ways in a sense. The players that, and then not to say they're going to make more money by being shitty, but they
Yeah,
get more attention if they have more of those sound bites in the locker room, and maybe it
for sure.
raises their public persona, and maybe that's more in the social media generation of if you're going to be, and you see this more and more with the younger athletes, they care more about their social media, and if they got a couple of sound bites being mouthy to a guy from the press, maybe that helps them out in their own
Yeah,
mind or something.
yeah.
But that's definitely, and I had never really considered like the racial element with Bonds there, but that is a good point. And his father being in the game, I'd never really considered that, but that is definitely an interesting point, I think. But
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of these things though where a given rider will hate a certain player, and they'll just have this battle. And look at impacts guys. One of the well, there's a number of we could do this all day long with players that maybe should have had a better look. Kenny Lofton got pinched off because for whatever reason, and it probably never occurred to him. Um, there was just a room on the ballot, 10 votes during his time.
yeah,
There weren't enough guys. I mean, the list in the years he's in the ballot, the list of dark ink on the ballot, it's long. There's just a
yeah.
lot of dudes. And so he got pinched out of that. And then that hasn't been corrected. And then how about another thing? I'm a big guy on getting Felipe Alou in, especially before he dies. He is the first native Dominican Republic player ever in the big leagues. And then he went and so he trailblazes there. He's kind of their Jackie Robinson. And then he fights for all Latin players. He writes this, I don't want to call it a manifesto, but he writes this thing where he's like, listen up, baseball. You don't understand who we are. We do speak Spanish. A lot of us are under some kind of military junta. And so when you tell us I can't go home and play winter ball because of your rules, I got to go feed my whole entire family. And so he writes this whole thing. And it might have been a bigger story, but Kennedy gets shot during that month. And so like the energy that got put into that got sucked. So here's an incredible baseball life. He's really good friends with Adrian Beltre's dad. And Beltre's dad is like, hey, my kid's special in baseball. He's like, well, bring him around me. He can always be around me. And so when Beltre was a baby player, he was in and amongst guys who were always older. And so the stories about him that leaked out of the Dominican were that Beltre is like 5 years younger than he's like an 8-year-old playing with 12-year-olds and like hanging and stuff, right? But it was Felipe who was kind of guiding these things. And Felipe was the guy that took Pedro when Pedro was like kind of fucked up by the Dodgers because the Dodgers didn't believe in him because he was too small. He didn't look the part. And he rubbed his back and said, you're a great pitcher. It's not your time to be the pitcher, but when on the day you pitch, you're the ace and you're a great prospect. And then just like Tommy Lasorda with Oral Hershiser, he's like, he believed him. He's like, I believe you. I'm great. And unlock something in him. So you have always incredible stories about Felipe, not in the Hall of Fame. Don Zimmer, not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, how many GMs deserve to be in the Hall of Fame because of the way they ran teams? And we don't even try to get those guys in.
I am very far behind on the historical builders and who should be in and who's not in. I would be very ignorant on which executives are in and who's not. I think Pat Gillick is in the Hall of Fame, and he's the only one that comes to mind because he was a Blue Jay executive before.
Yeah.
Little bit of a homer here, of course, but it's interesting you mentioned Felipe Alou because earlier I was going to bring up his son as somebody who also I thought should have got more of a look than he did.
Fantastic ball player, yeah.
Just a great career, but because he didn't really have those massive benchmarks, I mean, he was a 300 career hitter with more than 300 homers, but in an era where at very minimum 4, if not 500 home runs were more than likely what you needed. He just didn't get enough attention. And also in an era where there were so many massive seasons, Felipe Alou hitting 312 with 38 homers doesn't stand out as much in 1998 as it would in 2008 or even 2018. But he's a guy where I feel like if he was playing in the modern era, if he debuted 15, 20 years later, people would respect him, I think, a lot more than they do.
Yeah, there's a lot of that too in what team you were on, what area you were in. That's why I think about the concept of, well, what did he mean? What did Bill Buckner miss by if we would have got the 3,000 hits or whatever it is? we get really hard on Baines being in, but he loses time in 3 seasons to work stoppages. You give him those games back, and look, we can't if we're going to give credit for like World War II and everything else. These are their own little mini wars. Well, he all of a sudden he cruises to 3,000 hits. And like, well, is that the problem that he didn't get the 3,000? So what are these guys missed by? The guy that I think of as the bar, like if you're better than this player, then you're going to go in. And nobody ever expects this player to get there, but he's so good. He's so high up the list. So Johnny Damon is my guy, right? If you're better than Johnny Damon, you're probably going in the Hall of Fame. And I don't know anybody that's like Johnny Damon needs to be in. Carlos Delgado, yes. Is Carlos Delgado better than Johnny Damon? I think so. But by how much? Is it the home runs? What is that difference? Is it the MVP votes he got? I don't know. But these margins, Joe, they're tiny. They're tiny, tiny, tiny margins.
Yeah, it's hard to compare for me an outfielder versus a first baseman because that will change the value. And if you're looking especially at formulas like WAR, a center fielder or shortstop, or they're going to get a more of a boost just from the nature of standing at the position, regardless of what they do, as opposed to a first baseman. But Johnny Damon, throughout the 2000s, was one of the more exciting players. He would hit 300. He'd give you 20 homers, 30 stolen bases. He was on at least 2 championship teams, if not 3, Boston and New York for sure. And there might have been a third one in there. A winning ball player, a winning ball player who was not a great fielder. He was an adequate fielder, but a great bat to have at the top of your order. I think there is something that is actually called the Baines meter, where people say if you're over 38 WAR, wins above replacement, then you could be a Hall of Famer. And Johnny Damon does clear that number. He's at 44 if you're looking at Fangraphs WAR over his 2,500 games. But he was an exciting ball player. He really was. And a guy who's kind of in the same vein as him, who would not have got nearly the amount of love that he probably deserved, was Brett Gardner. Brett Gardner was a hell of a ball player. He really was. And people don't really remember him. I mean, in New York they do. But 139 homers, 250 hitter, but a great defender, pretty solid offensive player. He had multiple 20-plus home run seasons, kind of cut from the same cloth as Johnny Damon in a way.
Yeah. I was looking up Dylan Cease earlier. We were talking about him, so I'll bring him back up. So I've figured a little thing out that I like for so. This is Pete's theory on value in terms of value of players. I'm pretty hard on the voters and how they vote for value. They vote on reputation as opposed to what happened on the field, right? And we like that kind of stuff. We like to know what happened on the field. So I have figured out that if you take WPA by game, not by season, and you look and you find out who did the thing that won the game, it's often the pitcher, but it might not just be Ohtani. Ohtani might hit a home run to lead off the game, but the Dodgers win 10-2. Not that valuable, that home run, right? And so when you start to process, look, this is not a knock on Ohtani, but it's hard to be the most valuable player in your player when you've got an MVP in Freddie Freeman, you've got MVP Betts, you had Clayton Kershaw, the world class thing, all these other things. It's hard to be the most valuable on that team. So, and don't begrudge Ohtani. I mean, he's I love watching him, but I didn't see any Brewers in the top 5, and they were the best team in the National League by record. And so we lose sight of what value is. So I figured out that WPA, if you look at it and you sort it by like who has the most games with the WPA of about 1.4 or better, right? We can discuss 1.4 versus 1. Why? I don't know, but the winning record in those games is high, right? So if you get to 1.4, so Dylan Cease last year had 12 games where he had a WPA of 1.4. Now, maybe he wasn't the prime player in those games, but he probably has a game score of 60 or better. Again, correlates well to winning. And all of a sudden you realize, like, damn, Dylan Cease and so of those 12 games, let me see here. They win. No. I'm going to pull the number up right now live. Here we go. I'm not saying but the Padres win 9 of those 12 games. And so I'll take as many of guys like that you have. You're going to give me 12. Your starts are going to be that good. I'm not talking about the rest of the starts. That's going to be less of a winning percentage, but that's a really, really, really valuable pitcher. Now, if you can do 8, I think Brian Wu had even more than that. And no one ever talks about that guy. But if you got a guy that can go give you a WPA of 1.4 or better 10 or more times in a year, you're talking about an MVP grade player. Not saying MVP, but MVP grade player. If they get above 20, they're probably the MVP of the league. There's some caveats in there, but that's really good. in terms of delivering for your team. But I don't see anybody talking that level of detail. They'll just say, look, Otani had 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases. Yeah, that's great. I thought stolen bases didn't matter. Why are we so stoked up on this, right? And again, not knocking Otani, but we get lost in the glitz. Judge is incredible, but was he better than a catcher? And I don't know if people saw this. I'll shut up here in a second. When the Mariners went on that run in September, so did Raleigh. And they went from being about a game or a half game ahead of the Rangers, who were a better team at that time. And then they went all up to the second best record in the American League in the time when it mattered the most. That's a lot of value. I'm not saying that Judge wasn't great and didn't deserve the MVP, but I don't know how you can have a catcher who does that with his team when they needed it most in the most challenging time of the season and tell me that wasn't enormously valuable. Like, at least say, hey, this is so close. I don't know. I don't vote for Judge if you want to, but by WPA, Judge isn't even in the game because his hits when they counted. Look, that means that Jazz didn't have any impact. That means that Trent Grisham, who had a fantastic year, who had all kinds of clutch home runs, that he didn't matter, and he did.
I think the MVP is just the best stat line award. I don't think it should be. I think I would have voted for Cal Raleigh. I don't have a vote, but if I did, I would have voted for Cal Raleigh. What you're doing behind the plate and also hitting in that ballpark, which we've mentioned already a couple times, is a horrible hitter's park. It is by pretty much every metric the worst park to hit in baseball. And you go for 60 as a switch hitting catcher while also calling one of the better pitching staffs in all of baseball. A young staff, which has also become one of the better staffs over the last couple of seasons. It's not like it's a bunch of veteran Cy Young winners they put together. They developed. And that development, you have to put some of it on Cal Raleigh about how good George Kirby's been, how good Gilbert's been. Woo. I think he was the most valuable player. But at the end of the day, people are going to look, and Judge had the better offensive stat line. And I think the brass tacks is that these writers, all of them, and it's not just a hit at the writers of the voting body, but you can't watch every single game. It's impossible in any sport to watch every single game.
That's right.
And especially baseball, where you got 15 games a night. It's
it's a lot.
Impossible. It's really impossible. It's more doable if you're talking a sport where there's 5 or 6 games a night, but even then, it's almost impossible. So I think most writers, especially if they're not in that market, they will go and they will see, oh, Judge had more homers, he had a higher batting average, that, the other was better for Judge. I don't know if there is as much depth when the average writer from Oakland or whoever who hasn't seen Cal Raleigh as much. Right. Maybe Oakland's not a great example being in the division. Whatever. Say Minnesota or Detroit hasn't seen Cal Raleigh as much. They're going to look at the numbers and they're going to say, sorry, Judge had a better year. And I hope that more goes into it than that. But for some of the writers who are maybe more of the old school mentality, I doubt that it does. I doubt that it does go beyond just a quick look at the stat line.
Yeah, and let me just say this out loud too. What you just described is the Hank Aaron Award.
Yeah, the best hitter.
So, and Pete would say, if we're going to do this right, Hank Aaron Award is for Judge. Great job. Otani, no doubt about it. Most valuable now becomes something else. And really, it should be the pyramid. So MVP should be above Cy Young and Hank. And like either player could go up and somebody else could be most valuable. But it shouldn't be unanimous and then the most obvious player because that person has the biggest name. And again, not taking anything away from the incredible year that Otani and Judge just had. They're incredible. But we can see what value looks like a lot better than what we're doing. And look, if you have a dream job, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the writers out there. If you have a dream job and you get to vote for the Hall of Fame and you get to write about baseball then get your fucking head in the stat sheet and look at it and then tell us why you made your decision, because I don't want to hear about 50-50. Now, look, pitching, incredible, right? But I still don't know that the value of Otani pitching was more than what Pete Alonso delivered. By the way, winning, you got to win. You got to win. A player could win an MVP on a losing team, but it's harder. It's harder to amass enough value because your team didn't go to the playoffs. And that's one of the things that drove this year's MVPs was, Raleigh. Gosh, there are so many. Soto was great too. It's so many great players. I just want to make sure that we do them justice that they deserve to look at the numbers more than just, look at the line score and say, oh, he hit a home run. Yeah, he hit it in the second. And they were up by 4 runs already,
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, for the American League, I would I would say that it was Raleigh. In the NL, I don't have a huge problem with them going Ohtani, but I think that maybe they should have
Sure.
given a little bit more love to guys like Juan Soto, who was phenomenal, and Geraldo Perdomo as well, who played
my God.
161 games, great
Yeah.
defense at a primary
Yeah.
position, 20 and 27, walks more
Yeah.
than he strikes out, which is the quickest way to my heart. If you walk more than you strike out, and he had a 13%
Yeah.
walk rate, 11% strikeout rate. He was phenomenal. I wouldn't have minded seeing Perdomo get a couple of votes because without him, Arizona, even with Corbin Carroll, would not have done as well as they did. And they didn't even have that great of a season. But there's just the whole picture with Ohtani. He is the media darling. He is the 50-50 guy. He pitches.
Yep.
He's a relatively personable guy, considering he doesn't speak much English. He's well liked.
Yeah.
He kind of checks every box. He kind of just checks every box. And I think it's very easy for the writers to look at the home run leaders and see, okay, Ohtani, 55 homers. He has 146 runs. I think it was a lot easier for writers, I would imagine, to vote for Ohtani as opposed to the American League decision.
And how do you blame him? He is absolutely incredible. And as much as we were talking earlier about RBIs and it's everything else, and so runs, it helps to have a couple of Hall of Famers hitting behind you to get a lot of runs. But hey, you got to get on base to score runs, and also he knocked himself in about half of the time. So there is but I do think that there is a standard. It's not being met right now, because when I see the writers in lockstep that it's got to be Ohtani, that it's got to be, and I don't think it was I don't think it was unanimous in the judge's case, but we can do better than that. And look, frankly, the pitching, they totally ignoring the elite pitching that happened last year in the National League. And I'm not talking about Skeens. I'm talking about the Phillies. They had guys knocking it out, and just, it was incredible. That team's gap from their pitching staff to everybody else's was like a whole nother great pitcher above. It was shocking how powerful their starting pitching was. And so if we're not going to account for that, then I'm going to pick who I want and then stamp my feet. I picked somebody else,
I would love there to be for the Hall of Fame, for the MVP, for anything, that you need to fully explain yourself. You need to have an article. You need to go on a show or something.
Yeah.
You need to, and that's the worst for me, is when there's a Hall of Fame ballot and you don't even know who it's by, because they're almost too ashamed to even tell you they've put it out there. For the awards, at least we know who's voting for the awards and what their order is and everything. And usually there's a column that goes along with it, but it should be mandatory. There was a writer in Toronto whose ballots, I'm not going to name her, you can find it if you want to find it, whose ballots this year for the awards voting were horrible, awful. And there was no column behind it. There was no reasoning, no explanation. It should not be allowed. That should absolutely not be allowed. If you're going to have the responsibility of giving out these awards, and these awards are very important. If Jeff Kent doesn't have an MVP in 2000, does he go to the Hall of Fame? Maybe, maybe not. It's a harder path for him without the MVP. So these awards that are given out have such historical implications. You need to really reason why you're giving this guy first place, this guy's in seventh place. If you're not putting your stats behind it, your thought process behind it, I'm not going to take you seriously most of the time.
But it's funny when you grow up at a time, the players well. You're talking a lot about Toronto, and I love that, because it's great to hear someone else's personal, like, first-hand account. When Bonds lost his MVP to Terry Pendleton early on, do you think that pissed him off towards the, I mean, look, Terry Pendleton had a great year, right? But Bonds was better. He was just better. And then when he loses it to Kent, I'm like, oh my gosh. So there's two very questionable ones. And they probably should have just called it the Barry Bonds Award. We're going to stop giving it to you. That award is now called the Barry Bonds Award, whatever. But it does make a difference, right? And Kent for sure gets to say he was an MVP, because for the most part, we ignore second, third, fourth, fifth place votes, even though we shouldn't, because that's sustaining that for 5 years, 10 years, whatever that is. That's hugely valuable. So, the other thing about Bonds is the year he went 40-40, no one gave a fuck about that. No one cares that Soriano did it. Soriano went 40-40-40, 40 doubles, 40 homers, 40 stolen bases. No one gives a fuck, right? So it's funny when we latch on to something. Canseco, 40-40, first guy, he invented it. They laughed at him at spring training. He's like, I think I'll do 40-40. He didn't say 40-40. He's like, I think I'll hit 40 home runs. I think I'll steal 40. And they thought it was a joke. They laughed in his head, and then he did it. And it didn't change their attitude about him, right? So he does this thing that no one else really can do. Bonds gets 40-40. I think it was on 96. And the Giants are starting to sell their season tickets, their seat licenses, and they're getting hype up. They don't use Bonds in their promotional material. They're so pissed off at him, and they're trying to trade him, right? And so there was a lot of animosity, and all that stuff gets forgotten later on. But it's crazy how much detail and how much improbable stuff happens that we latch onto and elevate it to a higher level than it probably should be.
Yeah, the narratives that go into whether it's a particular season or even into the awards, if a player is coming back off of a big injury or something like that, narrative ball is very much alive and well. It's not. I wish we lived in a world, not just in baseball, where everything was more down to the data and the science and the facts.
Yeah.
That is not the world we live in. There are narratives being spun, and you'll see it sometimes as you approach the trade deadline. All the articles written by the major publications are all talking about the same things. Sometimes you get the impression that there are marching orders that are given one way or another. You talk about this, don't talk about that. The Tyler Skaggs trial got almost no massive media coverage. That was probably something where the league was like, maybe don't write an article about it if you don't need to. And I'm maybe being a bit of a conspiracy theorist there, but it does feel like sometimes things are prioritized as a group where it's Fox wrote about it, NBC wrote about it, Yahoo, ESPN, they all wrote about it at the same time. And then there's a major something that doesn't get covered. It makes you think maybe there is something
there's
driving the narrative.
There's a media department for a reason. Hey, listen, I've had you for over an hour now. Awesome. Thank you. Please come back. Let's do it again. Everybody go pay attention to Joe Orrico's stuff. If you like sports like I do, I'm going to put up really fast here a couple of his links. You guys definitely go support what Joe does. Just go look for him on X. It's not hard to find Joe Orrico, right? You guys know what to do here with this. Anything in closing before we go?
I just want to say thank you. It was really, really great time being on here with you. A lot of fun. I will happily come back and do it. I'd love to talk baseball. If you want to talk other sports, I won't be as well versed, but baseball is
baseball's my sweet spot. Let's do it.
Baseball is
all right, everybody. I'm going to see y'all in a few minutes. I'm going to have Hal on talking about drug smuggling. Woohoo! And then Joe, thank you very much. I'll say goodbye to you, and I'll see you on in a few minutes.
See ya.